The alarm bells rang across the bridge of the human ship Endeavor. Commander Jake Morrison jumped from his chair and ran to the main screen. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. His hand shook as he read the message from the Galactic Federation. Council. The Nexus Network was dying for over 300 years. This massive system had connected every world in the galaxy. It carried messages between planets that were millions of miles apart. It opened gates in space so ships could travel quickly from one star to another. It protected whole worlds with powerful shields and weapons. Without it, the galaxy would fall apart. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez rushed onto the bridge. Her dark hair was messy, and her lab coat had grease stains on it. She had been working in the engine room when the alarm started. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. "The network failures are getting worse by the hour." Jake looked at the data on her screen. Star systems across the galaxy were going dark. The beautiful blue lines that showed the network connections were turning red and disappearing. It looked like a disease spreading through a body. "How bad is it?" Jake asked. "Bad," Lisa said. "The Valorian worlds lost contact 2 hours ago. The Technocrat home system went offline 30 minutes later. Even the Luminary energy stations are failing." Captain Ryan Torres walked over to them. He was a tall man with gray hair and worried eyes. He had commanded ships for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like this. "The Federation Council wants all ships to report to Centauri Prime immediately," he said. "They're calling an emergency meeting." The Endeavor turned toward the heart of the galaxy. As they traveled, more bad news came in. Planets that had enjoyed peace and plenty for centuries were suddenly cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Food shipments stopped. Medical supplies ran out. Billions of people faced starvation and disease. On the mining world of Kepler-4, engineer Pete Collins watched the sky turn dark. The massive orbital stations that controlled the planet's weather had stopped working. The air recycling plants were shutting down one by one. The automated mining machines stood silent in the vast metal quarries. Pete was one of only 50 humans on a world with 2 million aliens. Most of the planet's people were Zephyrians, tall blue beings who had built the mining operation using Nexus network technology. They stood around looking lost and scared. Their advanced computers and robots had always done everything for them. "What do we do now?" asked Supervisor Zelthor, a Zephyrian who had never seen technology fail before. His blue skin had turned pale with fear. Pete looked around the mining complex. Everything made by the network was dead, but he noticed something else. In the corner of the main building sat some old human equipment that the miners had brought with them years ago. A simple radio transmitter, some basic tools, and a small power generator that ran on chemical fuel instead of network energy. "We fix things ourselves," Pete said, back on the Endeavor. Dr. Lisa worked day and night trying to understand what was happening. The network failure followed a pattern, but not one that made sense. It wasn't random like a disease or an attack. It was more like the whole system had been designed to break down. "I think I know what's happening," she told Jake and Ryan as they gathered in the ship's meeting room. The architects built the network to last exactly 312 years. After that, it starts to shut down. The architects were the mysterious beings who had built the Nexus network long before any of the current galactic civilizations had learned to travel between stars. They had vanished without a trace, leaving only their incredible technology behind. For centuries, scientists had studied their machines, but never fully understood how they worked. "Why would they do that?" Ryan asked. "Maybe they thought it would force other species to become independent," Lisa said. "Or maybe they just never expected anyone else to use their technology for so long." Jake shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Why, what matters is that every major civilization in the galaxy depends on that network. Without it, they'll collapse within months." The ship's communication officer, Danny Martinez, came running into the room. "Captain, I'm getting strange signals from the human colonies," he said. "They're not using network channels. They're talking to each other on old radio frequencies." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Our colonies are still in contact." "Yes, sir. Not all of them, but many are. They're using equipment that doesn't depend on the network." This was the first good news they had heard in days. while the advanced alien civilizations fell silent one by one. The scattered human settlements were still talking to each other. They used simple radios, laser beams, and even old-fashioned message rockets to stay connected. On New Pittsburgh factory supervisor Amy Chen faced a crisis. The huge manufacturing plant that produced medical supplies for 12 star systems had stopped working. The alien workers stood around helplessly as their sophisticated machines shut down. The factory's computer brain, connected to the Nexus network, could no longer control anything. But Amy had an idea. She gathered her human workers and some of the more flexible aliens. "We're going to run this place the old way," she said. "By hand, if we have to." Most of the aliens thought she was crazy. How could they possibly make complex medical equipment without computer control? But Amy's team started taking apart the automated systems. They found the basic machinery underneath, all the computer controls, motors, pumps, mixers, and assemblers that could work without network connections. Within hours, they had parts of the factory running again. It was slower and messier than before, but it worked. Life-saving medicines started flowing to nearby hospitals once more. News of these small successes began to spread through the galaxy's remaining communication channels. While the great civilizations struggled with their failing technology, humans were finding ways to keep essential systems running. They fixed broken machines with spare parts from other machines. They rewired systems in ways the original builders never intended. They made new tools from scrap metal and old electronics. The Valorians, who could read minds and share thoughts across vast distances, found their mental network growing weak as the Nexus amplifiers failed. The technocrats, who had replaced parts of their bodies with computers, began to malfunction as their cybernetic implants lost connection to the central data systems. The luminary beings of pure energy watched helplessly as their power matrices destabilized, but humans kept working. They didn't have advanced mental powers or cybernetic enhancements or energy bodies. They just had hands and tools and stubborn determination. When something broke, they figured out how to fix it. When the right parts weren't available, they made do with whatever they could find. As the Endeavor finally reached Centauri Prime, Jake, Ryan, and Lisa could see the chaos below. The beautiful capital city of the Federation was in darkness. The flowing towers that had once reached toward the stars now stood like dead monuments. Emergency lights flickered in some buildings, but most of the city was dark and silent. In the Great Council Chamber, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for what might be their last meeting. The proud leaders of ancient civilizations sat in emergency lighting, their advanced technology useless around them. Fear filled the air like smoke. High Chancellor Zephyron of the Valorian Collective stood at the center of the chamber. His tall, elegant form seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the failure of everything his people had built their lives around. His voice carried across the silent room. "The end has come," he said. "The network that gave us peace and prosperity for 3 centuries is dying. Our worlds are isolated. Our people are suffering. We face a future of darkness and barbarism." But Jake Morrison, sitting with the small human delegation, thought about Pete Collins on his mining world, about Amy Chen in her factory, and about all the other humans who were refusing to give up. Maybe it wasn't the end after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of something different. He raised his hand to speak, and the fate of the galaxy began to change. 3 weeks had passed since the great network began to die. The galaxy grew darker each day. Whole star systems had gone silent. Trade routes that had carried goods between worlds for centuries were empty. Fear spread like wildfire through the remaining communication channels. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Earth vessel Liberty. She was a short woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Around her, the crew worked at stations lit only by emergency power. Even human ships struggled as the network's collapse affected navigation and long-distance communication. "Report," she ordered her communications officer. "Ma'am, we're getting distress calls from everywhere," the young officer replied. "The Valorian homeworlds are in chaos. Their mental link is breaking down. The technocrat systems are crashing one by one. Even the Luminari are asking for help." Kate shook her head. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were falling apart. These were species that had mastered space travel when humans were still living in caves. Now they were helpless because their perfect technology was failing them. On Haven Station, the last neutral meeting place in the galaxy, representatives from every major civilization gathered for an emergency council. The station's lights flickered constantly as its power systems struggled without network support. High Chancellor Zephyron looked older than his 800 years. His blue skin had turned almost gray with worry. "We must face the truth," he said to the assembled delegates. "Our civilizations are dying. The Valorian mental network that has connected our people for 1,000 years is fading. We can barely communicate with our own colonies." Ambassador Theorix of the Technocrats spoke next. Half of his body was mechanical, but many of his cybernetic parts had stopped working. "Our situation is worse," he said in a voice that crackled. "With static, our people enhance their minds with network connections. As the system fails, they are losing their memories, their knowledge, even their personalities." The Luminary representative, a being of pure energy contained in a crystal shell, pulsed weakly. "Our power matrices are becoming unstable. We may cease to exist within days." Fear filled the chamber. These proud species had built an empire that spanned the galaxy. They had defeated diseases, ended wars, and created paradise on thousands of worlds. But they had done it all by depending on one system. Now that system was dying, and they didn't know how to survive without it. Admiral Kate Sullivan entered the chamber with her small human delegation. Most of the aliens barely looked at them. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy, less than a century since first contact. Their technology was primitive compared to the great civilizations. What could they possibly offer in this crisis? But Dr. Sam Harper, a human scientist who studied ancient civilizations, had been working day and night to understand the architects. He carried a data pad filled with his research as he approached the speaking platform. "I think I know why the network is failing," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the desperate silence of the chamber, everyone heard him clearly. "The architects built their technology to be perfect," Sam continued. "Every component was designed to exact specifications. Nothing could be changed or modified. They created a system that would work flawlessly for exactly as long as they calculated it would." Last, he activated his datapad, showing holographic images of architect ruins. "But perfection has a price. When something is made to be perfect, it cannot adapt. It cannot be repaired in ways the original builders didn't plan for. When it breaks, it stays broken." The alien representatives listened with growing horror. Their entire civilization was built on architect technology. If Sam was right, then everything they depended on would eventually fail in the same way. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, humans were proving that imperfection could be stronger than perfection. On the agricultural world of Harmony Prime, farmer Joe Mitchell faced a crisis that would have meant starvation for billions. The automated farming systems had controlled every aspect of food production for centuries. They managed the weather, controlled the insects, and harvested crops with perfect efficiency. But now the systems were dead, and the alien farmers didn't know how to grow food without them. Joe was a simple man who had grown up on a farm on Earth before coming to the colonies. He looked at the vast fields of crops that were beginning to wither without computer control. The alien farmers stood around helplessly, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. "We need to get our hands dirty," Joe told them. "Forget them computers. Plants have been growing for millions of years without machines to help them." The aliens thought he was crazy. How could they possibly feed billions of people without automation? But Joe started teaching them the old ways. How to read the soil by touching it. How to tell if plants were healthy by looking at their leaves. How to save seeds for next year's planting. It was hard work, much harder than letting machines do everything. But slowly, the crops began to recover. The aliens learned that their own hands and eyes could do things that computers couldn't. They began to understand that sometimes the simple way was better than the complicated way. Back on Haven Station, the council meeting continued. More bad news arrived every hour. The devourer fleets from the dark regions beyond the galaxy had begun their attack. These hostile aliens had been waiting for centuries for the galaxy's defenses to weaken. Now they were striking at undefended worlds. "Our defense systems are offline," reported General Kithara of the Valorian military. "We cannot coordinate our fleets without the network. We cannot even communicate with our own ships once they leave this system." Admiral Sullivan stepped forward. "We can help with that," she said. The alien representatives looked at her with skepticism. Human military technology was centuries behind theirs. Their ships were smaller, slower, and less advanced. What could they possibly do against the Devourer? "Invasion fleets. Our ships don't depend on the network," Kate explained. "We use our own communication systems. Radio, laser links, even message drones when we have to. It's not as fast or efficient as the network, but it works." She activated her personal communicator, and within minutes was talking to human ship captains scattered across the galaxy. The aliens watched in amazement as this primitive communication system actually functioned when their advanced technology had failed. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, Amy Chen's factory had become a model for the entire sector. Word of her success had spread, and desperate alien administrators were begging her to help them restart their own manufacturing plants. Amy walked through a massive technocrat factory that had been silent for weeks. The alien workers followed, her like lost children, hoping she could make their machines work again. The factory was incredibly complex, with systems that even the technocrats no longer fully understood. "The problem is that you built everything to be perfect," Amy told the factory's supervisor, a cyborg named Deltrin 7. "When one part fails, the whole system stops working because there's no backup plan." She pointed to a massive assembly line that stretched for miles through the factory. "Look at this! If any single component breaks down, the entire line shuts down. That's efficient when everything works, but it's fragile." Amy's solution was radical. She wanted to break the massive production line into smaller, independent sections. Each section would be simpler and could work even if other sections failed. It wouldn't be as efficient as the original design, but it would be much more reliable. The technocrats were horrified. Their whole culture was based on efficiency and perfection. The idea of deliberately making things less efficient seemed like madness, but they were desperate enough to try anything. Within days, parts of the factory were running again. The modified production lines were slower and messier than before, but they worked. Essential supplies began flowing to nearby colonies once more. As news of these successes spread, something unexpected began to happen. The alien civilizations that had dismissed humans as primitive began to pay attention. Maybe there was something to be learned from these newcomers, who seemed to thrive when everything else was falling apart. But time was running out. The Devourer fleets were advancing on multiple fronts. Without the network's defensive systems, entire worlds were defenseless. The galaxy needed more than just working factories and farms. It needed a military solution. Admiral Sullivan stood before the emergency council one more time. Outside the station's windows, the stars seemed dimmer than before, as if the galaxy itself was dying. But Kate had an idea that might save them all. "We need to fight this war the human way," she said. "Not with perfect technology, but with determination and creativity. We need to take apart their perfect war machines and build something new from the pieces." The fate of trillions of lives hung in the balance. The great test was about to begin. The message that changed everything came from the outer rim of the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison received it on his ship just as he was preparing to leave Haven Station. The words were simple but terrifying. "Human colony ships are fighting back against the Devourers and winning." Admiral Kate Sullivan rushed to the communication center as soon as she heard the news. For weeks, everyone had assumed the human colonies on the frontier were doomed. They had small populations, basic weapons, and no connection to the failing network. How could they possibly stand against the Devourer war fleets? "Get me a direct link to the Resilience," Kate ordered. The Resilience was her fastest ship, commanded by Captain Ben Parker. She had sent him to investigate the Outer Rim 3 days ago. Captain Parker's face appeared on the screen, and he was smiling. Behind him, Kate could see the bridge of his ship, but it looked different. Cables and wires ran everywhere. Strange devices had been bolted to the walls. It looked like a junkyard, but everything seemed to be working. "Admiral, you need to see this," Ben said. "The colonists out here have been busy. They've turned their mining equipment into weapons. They've strapped armor plating from old cargo ships onto their hulls. They're fighting the Devourers with tools and spare parts." Kate stared at the screen in amazement. "Are you telling me that farmers and miners are defeating one of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy?" "Yes, ma'am. And they're doing it because the Devourers don't know how to fight an enemy that doesn't follow the rules." High Chancellor Zephyron and the other alien leaders watched this conversation with growing interest. They had been preparing to surrender to the Devourers or flee to the far edges of space. The idea that anyone could actually fight back seemed impossible. Dr. Maya Patel, a human engineer who had been working with the alien technical teams, stepped forward. "May I explain what's happening?" she asked. The Chancellor nodded, though he looked skeptical. Maya was young and wore simple work clothes that were stained with grease and metal dust. She didn't look like someone who could solve galactic problems. "The Devourers are like the architects," Maya began. "They build perfect war machines designed to fight in specific ways. Their ships are incredibly advanced, but they're also predictable. They expect their enemies to fight back with similar technology." She activated a portable holographic projector that showed a Devourer warship. It was sleek and deadly, covered with weapons and shields. "This ship is designed to fight other warships in space battles. It expects to face enemies with similar capabilities." The hologram changed to show a human colony ship. It was ugly and patched together, with mismatched parts welded onto its hull. "This is what our colonists are flying. It's not pretty, but it's unpredictable. The Devourers don't know how to fight something that might use mining lasers as weapons or cargo containers as missiles." Back on the frontier, the battle for New Frontier Colony was proving Maya's point. The Devourer attack fleet had arrived, expecting to find a defenseless farming world. Instead, they found a planet ready for war. Colony leader Susan Davis had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. She was a former military engineer who had retired to the peaceful farming world 5 years ago. But when the network failed and the Devourers began their advance, Susan's military training came back to her. "Remember, we don't need to destroy their ships," she told her defenders over the colony's makeshift communication system. "We just need to confuse them and make them waste their time here while the rest of the galaxy prepares." The colonists had turned their farming equipment into weapons. Crop sprayers became chemical weapons launchers. Harvesting machines were converted into mobile gun platforms. Even the children helped by building decoy targets from farm equipment to confuse the enemy scanners. When the Devourer ships entered orbit, they found a planet that didn't behave like their war computers expected. Instead of military targets, they saw agricultural equipment that somehow shot back. Instead of defensive positions, they found farms that exploded when attacked. The Devourers had never faced an enemy that turned everyday objects into weapons. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Devourers eventually retreated, not because they were defeated, but because they couldn't understand what they were fighting. Their perfect war machines were designed to calculate the best tactics against known enemies. They couldn't adapt to an enemy that used unknown tactics with improvised weapons. News of this victory spread quickly through the remaining human communication networks. Other colonies began copying New Frontier's tactics. Soon, Devourer fleets across the galaxy were facing enemies they couldn't predict or understand. On Haven Station, the alien leaders watched these developments with growing amazement. High Chancellor Zephyron called Admiral Sullivan to a private meeting. The Chancellor's elegant quarters were lit only by emergency lighting, but his eyes were brighter than they had been in weeks. "Admiral, I must ask you something," the Chancellor said. "How do your people do this? How do you create solutions from nothing? How do you fight impossible battles and win?" Kate thought for a moment before answering. "We've never had perfect technology, so we learn to make do with what we have. When something breaks, we fix it. When we don't have the right tools, we make new ones. When faced with an impossible problem, we try impossible solutions." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, human repair teams were spreading the word about practical engineering. Chief Engineer Tony Barnes had arrived on the crystal world of Zarian, home to the Luminary energy beings? The Luminary existed as pure thought and energy, living in crystal matrices that were powered by the network. As the network failed, the Luminary were dying. Their energy forms were becoming unstable without the constant power supply they had depended on for thousands of years. Tony found himself trying to save an entire species that didn't even have physical bodies. We need to build backup power systems, Tony explained to the Luminary elders. Simple ones that don't depend on the network. The Luminary were confused. We are beings of pure energy. We do not understand physical construction. Tony scratched his head. This was the strangest engineering problem he had ever faced. How do you teach energy beings to build physical machines? But he had an idea that might work. You don't need to build them yourselves, he said. You need to teach other species how to build them for you. In return, you can share your knowledge of energy systems. This was the beginning of something new. Instead of each species depending on the network, they began depending on each other. The Luminary taught energy manipulation to the technocrats. The technocrats shared their computer knowledge with the Valorians. The Valorians used their mental abilities to coordinate construction projects across multiple worlds. And humans taught everyone the most important skill of all, how to fix things when they break. On the industrial world of New Pittsburgh, Amy Chen's factory had become a training center for the entire sector. Alien engineers came from dozens of worlds to learn human manufacturing techniques. They were shocked by what they saw. This is chaos, complained engineer Vex 9 of the Technocrat Industrial Council. Your production lines are inefficient. Your quality control is inconsistent. Your workers make decisions without consulting the central computer. Amy smiled. That's exactly right. And that's why it works when everything else fails. She showed Vex 9 to production lines side by side. One was a perfectly restored technocrat assembly line that produced medical equipment with flawless precision. The other was a human-modified line that produced the same equipment, but with components that could be easily replaced or repaired. Your line produces better equipment, Amy admitted. But when your line breaks down, it stays broken until you get exact replacement parts from the manufacturer. My line produces good enough equipment, and when it breaks, we can fix it with whatever parts we have available. Vex 9's mechanical brain processed this information. Good enough is better than perfect if perfect is fragile. Now you're getting it, Amy said, as the weeks passed. The tide of war began to turn. The Devourer advanced slowed as they encountered more and more colonies that fought back in unexpected ways. Their perfect war machines struggled against enemies that used improvised tactics and constantly changing strategies. But the real change was happening behind the front lines. The great civilizations of the galaxy were learning to survive without the network. They were building new technologies that combined alien sophistication with human practicality. Most importantly, they were learning to work together instead of depending on ancient machines. The galaxy was discovering that the end of one age could be the beginning of something even better. The Great Repair began 6 months after the network's collapse. What had started as desperate emergency fixes was now becoming something much bigger. Across the galaxy, humans worked alongside aliens to rebuild everything from the ground up. Engineer Grace Thompson stood on the crystal platform high above the city of New Lumina, watching thousands of workers install new power systems. Grace was a small woman with calloused hands and a tool belt that had seen years of hard use. Around her, Luminary energy beings floated in their crystal shells, learning to work with physical machinery for the first time in their long lives. The backup generators are ready, reported Elder Zextal, one of the Luminary Council members. His crystal shell pulsed with nervous energy. But we still do not understand how these crude machines can replace our elegant energy matrices. Grace smiled and patted the metal housing of a simple fusion reactor. They're not elegant, but they work. When this breaks down, any engineer in the galaxy can fix it. Your old systems were beautiful, but only you knew how to maintain them. The Luminary had been the hardest species to help. They existed as pure energy and had never needed to understand physical objects. But Grace's team had found a solution. Instead of trying to teach energy beings to fix machines, they created simple systems that other species could maintain, while the Luminary focused on what they did best, controlling energy flows on the other side of the galaxy. Programmer Kevin Brooks was solving a different kind of problem. He sat in the central computer core of Nexus Prime, surrounded by technocrat engineers whose cybernetic implants were failing as the old network died. The technocrats had enhanced their brains with computer connections for so long that many couldn't think clearly without digital assistance. Some had lost access to their own memories when their implants stopped working. Others found themselves unable to perform simple tasks they had done easily before. "We are becoming less than we were," said Chief Engineer Calrex, touching the dark implants on the side of his head. "Without the network connections, we are just biological beings again." Kevin looked up from the primitive computer terminal he was building. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Your implants made you incredibly smart, but they also made you dependent. What happens when you can think for yourselves again?" He was building new computer systems that could work independently of the old network. They were much simpler than what the technocrats were used to, but they could be repaired and modified by anyone with basic technical knowledge. Most importantly, they enhanced the technocrats' abilities without replacing their natural thinking. "These systems will help you access information and perform calculations," Kevin explained. "But you'll still be making the decisions. You'll still be thinking your own thoughts." Some of the younger technocrats were excited by this idea. They had been born into a world where the network thought for them. The chance to experience independent thought was new and frightening, but also thrilling. Dr. Rachel Stone was making an even more surprising discovery on the Valorian homeworld. Rachel was a psychologist who had come to help the Valorians deal with the collapse of their mental network. She expected to find a civilization in chaos as their telepathic connections failed. Instead, she found something unexpected. As the artificial telepathic amplifiers stopped working, the Valorians were discovering what it meant to have private thoughts for the first time in centuries. "It is strange," explained Counselor Veltar as they walked through the crystal gardens of the capital city. "For 1,000 years, all Valorians have shared thoughts and emotions. We acted as one mind in billions of bodies. But now, each of us thinks alone." Some Valorians found this terrifying. They had never experienced loneliness or personal secrets. Others were fascinated by the privacy of their own minds. Young Valorians especially seemed to enjoy having thoughts that belonged only to them. "Some of our people are afraid," Veltar continued. "They believe we are becoming primitive, like the time before our mental unity. But others say we are becoming something new." Rachel helped him understand that individual thinking wasn't primitive at all. It was a different way of being intelligent. Instead of one mind thinking the same thoughts, they could have millions of minds thinking different thoughts and then sharing the best ideas. But the biggest challenge was on the forge world of Vulcans. Heart Factory Supervisor Maria Gonzalez arrived to find the largest industrial complex in the galaxy completely shut down. The automated systems were so complicated that even the technocrats who built them no longer understood how they worked. Maria stood in the main factory hall, looking up at assembly lines that stretched as far as she could see. Millions of robotic arms hung motionless from the ceiling. Conveyor belts that once carried finished products to waiting ships were empty and still. Around her, alien workers waited helplessly for someone to tell them what to do. "The automated systems controlled everything," explained production manager Deltram Preen. "Every screw, every weld, every component. Without the network, we cannot even turn on the lights." Maria walked through the complex for 3 days, studying the systems and talking to workers. She found that the factory was incredibly efficient when it worked, but impossibly fragile when anything went wrong. A single failed component could shut down production lines that were hundreds of miles long. "We're going to break this place apart and put it back together," Maria announced at a meeting of all the factory supervisors. "Instead of one giant system, we'll build hundreds of smaller ones." The alien managers were horrified. The factory had been designed by the greatest engineers of multiple civilizations. It was a masterpiece of efficiency and precision. The idea of deliberately making it less perfect seemed like madness. But Maria's human workers began the task anyway. They disconnected the massive automated systems and replaced them with smaller, simpler machines that could be operated by hand if necessary. They broke the enormous assembly lines into sections that could work independently. They installed manual controls alongside the computer systems, The aliens watched in amazement as parts of the factory began working again. The new systems were slower and required more workers, but they were much more reliable. When one section broke down, the others kept working. When they ran out of one type of component, workers could modify the production line to use different parts. It is not as efficient as before, admitted Deltron Prime, watching human and alien workers collaborate on the assembly line, but it is more robust. It can adapt to problems instead of simply failing. Within months, the modified factory was producing more goods than the old automated system ever had. The secret was that it could keep working even when things went wrong. Instead of shutting down for days when a component failed, workers could fix problems in minutes. News of these successes spread throughout the galaxy. Alien civilizations that had been preparing for collapse began to hope again. But they also began to understand that their old way of life was gone forever. The age of perfect technology and effortless living was over. The new age would require work and cooperation and constant problem solving. Some aliens resented this change. They missed the easy perfection of the old network. But many others, especially the younger generation, embraced the challenge. They learned that working together to solve problems could be more satisfying than having machines do everything for them. The Devourer threat was fading as their perfect war machines continued to struggle against improvised defenses. But the real victory was happening in factories and power plants and communication centers across the galaxy. Billions of beings were learning that they didn't need perfect technology to have good lives. They just needed reliable technology and the knowledge to fix it when it broke. The galaxy was becoming something new. It was messier and more complicated than before, but it was also stronger and more flexible. Most importantly, it belonged to the people who lived in it, not to ancient machines built by vanished civilizations. The age of human solutions had begun. 2 years had passed since the great network died. The galaxy looked completely different now. Where once there had been perfect cities powered by invisible technology, there were now bustling communities where people worked together to solve problems. The fear and despair of the collapse had been replaced by something unexpected. Hope. Captain Brandon Lee stood on the bridge of the USS Pathfinder, the first ship built using the new way of doing things. The bridge was a strange mix of technologies from across the galaxy. Valorian crystal displays showed navigation data. Technocrat quantum computers calculated jump coordinates. Luminary energy cores powered the engines. But holding it all together was human engineering that anyone could understand and repair. All systems ready for departure, Captain, reported his first officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. She was young and enthusiastic, part of the new generation that had grown up during the rebuilding. To her, working with multiple alien technologies was completely normal. Brandon looked out at the space dock where his ship had been built. Human and alien workers moved together, installing equipment and running final tests. The dock itself was a perfect example of the new way. It used simple, reliable systems that could be maintained by any species, but it was more capable than anything the old network had ever produced. "Take us out," Brandon ordered. "Let's see how well this new design works." The Pathfinder moved smoothly away from the dock. Its hybrid systems worked perfectly together, even though they came from completely different technologies. More importantly, if something broke during the journey, any member of the crew could fix it using tools and parts that were available on every world. On the restored planet of New Kepler, engineer Pete Collins watched children playing in a park. He had helped design the playground. Equipment was built the new way it combined the artistic beauty of Valorian design with the mathematical precision of technocrat engineering and the sturdy practicality of human construction. When something broke, the children could help fix it themselves. Pete smiled as he watched a young Valorian girl and a human boy working together to repair a swing that had come loose. They didn't see each other as different species. They were just friends solving a problem together. This was the future the galaxy was building. The Federation Council now met in a new chamber that had been designed by representatives from every member species. High Chancellor Zephyron sat next to newly elected human representative Elena Martinez. The chamber itself embodied the new philosophy. It was beautiful and functional, but also simple enough that basic maintenance could be done by anyone. The Quarterly reports show continued improvement across all sectors. Alina announced to the assembled delegates, food production is up 30% from pre-collapse levels. Manufacturing output has exceeded all previous records. Most importantly, unemployment is at an all-time low because the new systems require more workers. This last point was something that had surprised everyone. The old automated systems had been incredibly efficient, but they had also left billions of beings with nothing meaningful to do. The new approach required more people to operate and maintain, but this turned out to be a good thing. Everyone had a job. Everyone felt useful. High Chancellor Zephyron stood to address the council. He looked healthier and more energetic than he had in decades. 2 years ago, we thought our civilization was ending. We believed that without perfect technology, we would return to barbarism. Instead, we have discovered something better than perfection. He gestured to the mixed group of representatives. We have learned that working together is better than depending on machines. We have learned that solving problems ourselves is more satisfying than having computers do everything for us. We have learned that a galaxy where everyone contributes is stronger than a galaxy where machines do all the work. On the research station orbiting Centauri Prime, Dr. Carlos Rivera ran the new Galactic Institute of Practical Engineering. Students from every species came here to learn the most important skill in the galaxy, how to fix things when they break. Carlos walked through a classroom where human, Valorian, technocrat, and Luminari students worked together on a broken communication device. The exercise was simple but important. Each student had to figure out how to repair the device using only basic tools and common materials. Remember, Carlos told his students, the best solution isn't always the most elegant one. Sometimes the best solution is just the one that works with what you have available. A young technocrat named Next7 raised her hand. Professor, this approach seems inefficient. Wouldn't it be better to design devices that never break? Carlos smiled. This was a question he heard often from students who had grown up with the old way of thinking. Next7, what happens when something that never breaks actually does break? The student thought for a moment. It cannot be repaired because no one planned for it to fail. Exactly. It's better to build things that can be easily repaired than things that supposedly never need repair. This lesson was being learned across the galaxy. The new technology wasn't as perfect as what came before, but it was much more reliable in practice. When something broke, people could fix it quickly and get back to work. This meant less disruption and more productivity overall. The Devourer threat had completely faded. Their perfect war machines had proven useless against enemies who constantly changed their tactics and equipment. The last Devourer fleet had been defeated, not by superior firepower, but by confusion. They simply couldn't fight an enemy they couldn't predict or understand. Admiral Kate Sullivan now commanded the expanded human fleet, but it was no longer a purely human organization. Ships crewed by mixed species used hybrid technologies to patrol the galaxy's borders. They were ready for any threat, not because they had perfect weapons, but because they could adapt to any situation. On the crystal world of New Lumina, the Luminari had learned to work with physical technology while maintaining their nature as energy beings. Elder Zixtal now served as an advisor to engineering teams across the galaxy, helping them understand how energy and matter could work together in new ways. We thought we were superior because we had transcended physical form, Zixtal explained, to a group of young engineers, but we learned that every form of existence has value. Physical beings understand things that energy beings cannot. Working together, we can solve problems that neither could solve alone. This cooperation between different types of beings had led to technological advances that no single species could have achieved. Valorian mental abilities combined with technocrat computing power and human creativity produced solutions that were truly revolutionary. That the agricultural worlds were thriving under the new system. Farmer Joe Mitchell had become something of a celebrity, teaching traditional farming methods to aliens who had forgotten how to grow food without computers. But the new agriculture wasn't primitive. It combined traditional knowledge with advanced technology in ways that were both efficient and sustainable. The old way treated the soil like a factory, Joe explained to visitors at his demonstration farm. We're learning to work with nature instead of trying to control it completely. The results spoke for themselves. The new farms produced more food with less environmental damage. They were also more resilient, able to continue producing even when equipment failed or weather conditions changed. As Brandon Lee guided the Pathfinder toward the edge of the galaxy, he reflected on how much had changed. The ship's mission was to make contact with civilizations beyond the known galaxy, bringing the message of cooperation and adaptability to new worlds. Behind them, the galaxy continued its work. Not perfect work, but good work done by people who understood that the best technology was technology that served people, not the other way around. The age of depending on ancient machines was over. The age of people working together to solve problems had begun. The Pathfinder jumped to faster than speed, carrying its mixed crew toward unknown stars. Whatever they found out there, they were ready for it. They had learned the most important lesson of all: when people work together and refuse to give up, there is no problem that cannot be solved. The galaxy had discovered that the end of one age could be the beginning of something even better.